This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Join us again on our journey this week across Asia and the world, and our assessment of what is going on. Joining us this week is a former diplomat of the Philippines based in Washington, Mr. Paglinawan, whom you have seen and heard here on our journeys frequently. And of course, our professor of international relations, ethics of international relations, Mr. Celso, Cainglet, who just arrived from another interview. And we have many issues to discuss, particularly in this week that the ASEAN is holding its conference here. And there are many vital issues for our Filipino audience and our Asian audience to appreciate. But first, let's review some critical news that has been observed in our media the past week. First, South Koreans clash with police over the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Defense Aerial Defense System that the U.S. has installed in South Korea, which is also the trigger for the intense reaction from North Korea and from China. We have a video clip to highlight the kind of and the intensity of the objections of the South Koreans. Maybe we can show a minute of this. And we want to highlight that these are mothers, grandmothers who are protesting and clashing with the police because such missiles are magnets for tension and conflict. And I'm sure the South Koreans themselves are very concerned about this. Maybe we can show that just to appreciate the intensity of the protests of our fellow Asians in South Korea.
주민분들 안에 들어가게 해주세요. 어떤 일이 있다 할지라도 이것은 우리 경찰들의 책임이니까 그건 알고 이야기하세요. 주민분들 들어가게 해달라고요. 주민들 들어가게 해주세요. 경찰.
THAAD missile. Okay, the second item is this is very important for Filipinos to appreciate the changing mood of Asia in relation to China and the issues that stand in between China and some of the members of ASEAN, particularly Vietnam. This is about Vietnam. Vietnam's softer stand on China and the South China Sea issues. And this comes from the Voice of America. So this is not a Chinese report, this is the Voice of America. And maybe we can read part of it. Vietnam shows signs of softening its approach toward China over their bitter maritime dispute, a move welcomed by nervous leaders in Beijing as it could rebalance Hanoi's foreign policy away from Washington while cooling decades of strife. Of course, this is a Voice of America. That's why they describe the Beijing reaction as nervous. But of course, Beijing is elated over this, not nervous. Beijing and Hanoi issued a communique January proposing negotiations on their conflicting claims in the South China Sea, the state-run media from both sides reported. The two sides will look for shorter-term solutions that avoid slighting either country's political position. So this is a lesson for us. Vietnam, which has a record of very militant relations with China. And now, this past week, for example, we hear Albert Del Rosario, former Philippine Foreign Secretary, or Roy Logoles, or Richard Haydarian talking about having to be tough. Who can be tougher than the Vietnamese? We will ask for your comment in a while. Next item in our developments in Asia is the neither here nor there U.S. flotilla. Because the initial announcement that the USS Carl Vinson is on the way to North Korea. Turns out that it was on its way to Australia, and only belatedly did it now proceed to North Korea. So this has made, to a great extent, the Trump saber rattling the laughing stock of the world. So again, this is another lesson, and I think Ado will have something to narrate, having experienced U.S. diplomacy while he was there in Washington. Okay, and this is the most important part, and I made my fearless forecast on Facebook. U.S. will talk with North Korea, whatever form, whether it's a six-party talk or six-party dialogue or some new arrangement that China will be brokering. And this is from the mouth of the American State Secretary himself. And this is from Reuters. U.S. says major conflict with North Korea possible. China warns of escalation. But there's another news item that is referring to this with Tillerson. But maybe we got this item. Can you take a look at the Reuters report? But anyway, the signal is very clear. After the saber rattling, as I predicted and expected, Trump now would have the excuse to talk to North Korea. Anyway, we'll explain more details later. And fifth, this is good for our business people in the Philippines. China invites Philippines to export bangus to China. And let me see. Let me read some details. So maybe our agricultural sector can take a cue from this. The Chinese government is inviting Philippine companies to export fish to the mainland that will be processed by China-ASEAN Marine Product Exchange, which transacts online, deliver offline, and settle cross-border trade. A Manila-based company, Sinocom, is already exploiting milkfish or bangus, according to Campe officials Jianzhou. Quote, we import milkfish from the Philippines and one of these companies is Sinocom, unquote, said Jian, adding that the Chinese people love Philippine fish. Okay, we have 5 items and we have another 5 minutes to discuss. Which one would you choose to react to? Ado, or you're more senior? Go ahead.
Well, regarding this saber rattling and prepositioning, in my experience, because Richard Haydarian in the Inquirer article said that the situation here will remain as it were. That is, if the U.S. decides not to engage. Well, I have bad news for Richard because the U.S. never engaged Russia, and will never engage China. But it will engage the Taliban. It will engage the Sultan of Sulu. It will engage the Syrians. Yung mga people who have no power to retaliatory power. No? In the case of Russia, for instance, when Crimea was taken away from Ukraine, they did nothing. And President Duterte is right here in our neighborhood. When China was building in 7 islands, The United States did not do anything. The only power in the entire world that could have, by a simple note verbal, made its intentions, expressed its intentions directly to the Chinese through diplomacy. But they didn't bother. So ganyan lang talaga sila eh. Pagkaya nila, yan. Now, why are they hem-hoeing here in South Korea? Because in North Korea. North Korea is not just North Korea. It is China. It is to the east of China, a very important border buffer from South Korea and Japan proceeding to mainland China.
I think in our Philippine-China focus, we have an item there on that China will not allow war at its doorstep. This is
Yes.
an opinion piece that we found in the China-U.S. Focus website. Okay.
Which is the very rationale why it built the seven islands. It
Yes,
will
as a-
war outside of its mainland, but never allow anybody going into its doorsteps.
Okay, and Celso, which do you prefer to comment on?
Yeah, like former National Security Advisor Roy Lugoles was really pushing that the Philippines, and not only the Philippines, but ASEAN would tackle the Hague ruling regarding the dispute in South China Sea. But that will never happen because
ASEAN will never take it up.
never take it up. Basing on history itself, usually ASEAN avoids any irritants to be discussed during its annual forum. Number two, a lot of ASEAN countries are profiting from their relationship from China, and they will never antagonize China.
And then you hear from the likes of Goles that, well, China is bribing these countries. Being profit mutually beneficial or benefiting mutually is not bribery. That's fair trade and fair exchange. you know.
I'm surprised that Mr. Goles will talk even about bribery along these issues.
Yes, and
Very sensitive.
yeah. So of course, I'd like to comment on the bangus interest of China, because if we just sell one bangus to each Chinese, we won't have enough fish ponds to produce that, and that's why we have to double, triple time on our productive capacity here. And I wanted to stress this, that our relations with China and our openness to, or the opening of the China market to our producers should stabilize. We cannot keep harping on issues that will create rift between the two of us. How will our agricultural sector, our industrial sector plan their 5-year, 10-year marketing programs? We had here Jojo Borja, who's an agro-industrialist from Mindanao, and he says Mindanao needs the China market.
And like what happened to the pineapple and the banana. When China, we were somewhat oversupply. Now we are undersupply. I think
Yeah.
we can only supply 70%. So there's a 30% deficit there. And it will take 1 or 2 years to adjust this entire productive cycle.
Well, in the previous interview we had with George C., who's a businessman who researched this, he says China has ordered $1.7 billion worth of foodstuffs, fruits, and so on from the Philippines, but we're actually only exporting $200 million worth. We have a deficit of productive capacity. Yeah. Okay, well, anyway, those are the developments in Asia, in our region. Stand by for our next segment, Philippine-China Focus. And we'll be discussing how President Duterte and the Philippines and China is upholding peace and prosperity in this ASEAN summit. Okay, let's take this break.